Secretary Mayorkas' refusal to comply with the law are driving this border catastrophe.
Meta's Instagram helped connect and promote a network of pedophiles. Snapchat's disappearing messages have been co-opted by criminals who financially extort young victims.
A day in politics is a lifetime, right?
Right.
So we've got a month until the election. In New Hampshire, I moved 25 points in 3 weeks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. It's been a busy 24 hours on Capitol Hill. That's not always the case, so we like to note it when it is. After more than 15 hours of debate, the Republican-led House Homeland Security Committee voted to advance articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Floor debate and discussion, well, those are expected next week. And in the Senate, top tech CEOs at companies like Meta, TikTok, and X went before the Judiciary Committee to testify about online child safety. Lawmakers grilled the tech executives about exploitation and endangerment of minors on their social media platforms. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins me now at the table. Scott, always great to see you. Let's start with the hearing today. I want to play for you a soundbite from the ranking Republican, Lindsey Graham, that got a lot of headlines. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you and the companies before us, I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands. You have a product. You have a product that's killing people. When we had cigarettes killing people, we did some about it, maybe not enough. You're going to talk about guns, we have the ATF. Nothing here. There's not a damn thing anybody can do about it. You can't be sued.
Just want to catch the audience up on one thing. You can't be sued. That's a line in reference to social media platforms. As of 2005, under a law called Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, gun manufacturers cannot be sued either. So when Lindsey Graham makes a reference to the ATF, yes, that is a regulatory agency, but gun manufacturers, and there are plenty of children victims thereof, can't be sued either. Scott, the hearing today is about moving legislation or a consolation prize for victims' families who would like legislation but haven't seen it yet and may not see it this year?
I think we're about to find out. There are so many hearings on Capitol Hill, they become white noise after a while. This one was just different from the start. Not just because it's an issue with which Americans are viscerally connected, but because in the room were all these families who either lost loved ones that they attributed to a social media experience or being victimized on social media. It was an emotional room.
Bullied, mental health issues, in some cases suicide.
Body image issues, self-harm, a range of consequences from social media, they say. But it also served as a cathartic moment, I think, for a lot of those families and a lot of people watching from home. That's why you heard applause when Lindsey Graham spoke. You don't get applause at a congressional hearing very often, but the politics on this are totally inside out. There's a political will, I think a public will, to have some legislation to either crack down on the social media companies, increase what they have to do to protect kids, or have a regulatory body police this on the government's behalf. And you have bipartisan coalitions that have already formed. You know, these political mixed couples of Democrat Richard Blumenthal, Republican Marsha Blackburn, Democrat Elizabeth Warren, Republican Lindsey Graham. The infrastructure for legislation is right there, but nobody's moved before today. Who knows if they'll move after today?
And I listened to experts in the tech space say, yes, legislation could be helpful, but it's hard to write and hard to make practically useful. And there are risks. Let's say you want to have an age requirement for getting on a platform. Well, then suddenly a kid or their parent is putting age information in platforms' hands directly. Well, there are privacy issues there. There are data management issues there. This is a tough space. What do you hear about the ability to actually write something and get it passed?
This is the same fear with AI legislation. You have to understand the thing before you can legislate and regulate the thing. And it was clear Congress missed the boat in the important opening months of social media. They should have been on top of it then. I think what Lindsey Graham and Elizabeth Warren would argue is if we set up a regulatory agency and a nonpartisan independent agency, we can bring in experts to do just that kind of thing. But the overall message I got from today's hearing is that you can put some of this responsibility, rightfully so, on parents, but to expect parents to keep up with the technological change and the way kids are good at finding backdoors on all kinds of parental guidelines, you really should have the burden shifted to the people who make the technology. They're best suited and best educated to help protect it.
Scott, it's a continuous story, at least it has been for the last couple of weeks. Senate talks on a border deal. Where do they stand?
Oh, there's a more pessimistic group out there. Maybe it's the Washington Generals. I don't know who it is. Somebody out there is more pessimistic than Senate Republicans are right now. The prospects are dimming by the day. The closer you get to primary season for congressional candidates, the less they may want to be associated with a compromise on a top-tier issue like border security. Donald Trump is dunking on this deal. That doesn't help bring over Republicans. There seems to be concern about not just Republicans in the House, some of whom have said this is a non-starter, but Republicans in the Senate. We caught up with James Lankford, the chief negotiator for Senate Republicans today. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I think everybody's got to decide on their own. What's interesting is a lot of the elements that are in this bill, President Trump was actually looking for when he was president, that he had said, hey, needs to be done. And that's many aspects of this bill. There are gaps in our law. Obviously, there's been gaps in our law for a long time dealing with asylum, for instance. So we've got to be able to correct those things in law.
Major, he told me later they're a whisper away from releasing their deal. That sounds like a synonym for any day now or any week now. We've heard that for a while.
Scott McFarland, thank you so very much. Iran is threatening to, quote, decisively respond to any retaliatory attack by the United States following Sunday's Iranian-backed drone strike that killed 3 U.S. service members in Jordan. President Biden said he has already decided on how the U.S. will respond, but no details have been made public. CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now. Nancy, great to see you from the North Lawn. A couple of things I want to talk to you about. One, the current state of conversations involving the United States and several other nations to either create a ceasefire or a hostage exchange between Hamas and Israel.
Major, there is a new proposal on the table. It is backed by the U.S. It is backed by the Qataris. And that is significant because you have negotiations that have been going on for quite some time. And what they've coalesced around is the idea of a much longer humanitarian pause than we saw the first time that they tried this, with some success back in November. We're talking about a pause of several weeks in order to get more hostages out of Gaza. Certainly women and the elderly in the first wave, but they're hoping eventually soldiers and perhaps even the bodies of those that they know have been killed. Interestingly, today here at the White House, when I asked the national security spokesman, John Kirby, about how this proposal is being received by Hamas, he said that actually he thinks things are heading in the right direction. So he thinks that these talks are bearing fruit, which would obviously be significant because there are so many countries that would like to see these hostages come home, and of course would like to see a cease in the attacks as well.
Speaking of the attacks, Nancy, one of the hardest things any president must do is either converse or write letters to families who have lost someone in the United States military in service of their country. The president spoke to the families of the service members killed in that drone attack in Jordan. What is the latest you can share with us about that?
Right. Phone calls that a president never wants to make. In fact, the president said that to the families when he spoke to them by phone. And we got a little insight into what those conversations were like because the parents of one of the victims, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, actually shared a recording of the conversation with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution so that the public can listen in. Why don't we take a listen to some of that?
We're promoting her posthumously to sergeant.
Oh, wow. That is the best news I've heard today. Thank you so much. You don't know how much that means to us.
Oh, well, I tell you what, it means a lot to me. My son spent a year in Iraq until I lost him, and 1% of all these kids are the ones that we're going to take care of 99% of us.
Anyone can imagine what those parents must be going through right now. If you missed it at the very top, what the president was telling them was that posthumously their daughter, who held the rank of specialist, was going to be promoted to sergeant. And in response, her mother said, "Oh, wow, that is the best news I've heard all day."
Raw emotion indeed. Nancy Cordes with all the details from the North Lawn. Thank you so much. Nikki Haley says there is a path for her to win the Republican nomination. Next, we will look at upcoming primary and caucus contest to see what she has to do to remain competitive. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Well, the Republican primary delegate count is just getting started. Nikki Haley's path forward, well, there's some questions around it. Former President Trump currently leads Haley in the delegate count 32-17. Okay, not many have been decided. You need 1,215 delegates to secure the GOP nomination. Early next month, well, that's the Nevada caucus. Haley won't compete, which awards all 26 delegates then to former President Trump. Then South Carolina's primary. That's on February 24th. Trump has a significant polling lead, 50 delegates at stake there, and there's a possibility Trump could get all of those. And then after that, some of the biggest delegate hauls come on Super Tuesday. There is some winner-take-all states and some hybrid states where Trump could really run the table. To talk about all this, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Doug Hyde join us now. Caitlin is a CBS News political correspondent. Doug previously served as communications director for the RNC and to former House Majority Leader Eric Cantor. Doug, as the resident RNC delegate expert and rules expert here at the table, I mean, you're both experts, but Doug is the sort of assigned expert at the table. How difficult is Nikki Haley's path, or is there even a path for her, rationally, mathematically, to win the nomination?
There's a path, but it's really tough to find and look for, and ultimately isn't really up to her. It's about Donald Trump faltering, Donald Trump having some legal issue or health issue that then sways things. Now, she's going to stay in this at least through South Carolina, but as you mentioned, she may not get any delegates from her home state. That's not a great place to be in. Ron DeSantis would have been in that same place if he were running. He would have gotten no delegates from Florida, most likely. So she's trying to make her best case of why she should stay alive and stay in this. And ultimately, that case is about the problems around Donald Trump. So when we see court rulings against him, that helps buttress her case. But again, the political case and the mathematical case are not necessarily the same thing. So they're both hard, though. So, Caitlin, it sounds like one of the things that Nikki Haley may be saying as she makes her fundraising tour of Florida, Texas, California, and New York is, hey, let's, I understand the delegate math is tough, but we need a, in case of emergency, break glass plan. And I should be the one behind that broken glass.
Their campaign is making a couple different arguments here. First, they are saying that, look, 2 states have voted. There are still a lot of states to go. That's true. They are looking at states that have open primaries. So South Carolina is an example. Some big Super Tuesday states are examples where party registration doesn't matter. However, this is a game of getting enough delegates. And when you look at these maps that you have up here, that is such an uphill climb. The big case that she's been trying to make, to Doug's point, is about electability. She says this over and over again. Look, I'm the most electable. Look at all the polls. If you elect me, we have a mandate for winning up and down the ballot. The issue is, however, and you can speak to this too, Republicans I talk to, electability is just not a big priority because most Republicans think that Biden is easily beatable, especially among those supporting Trump. So yes, she's trying to argue that there's still a lot of game left to be played, but the rules of the game right now do not benefit her. And that's another real story of this election, is the way in which Trump...
And Doug, another thing that Nikki Haley tries to hang her hat on is, well, Michigan, February 27th. Yeah, it's a primary. You might do well there, but there's a convention on March 2nd where most of the delegates get actually awarded, and you don't have an inside track there. Yeah. So these things are complicated.
They're complicated. That's also a long time away. I mean, the gulf between New Hampshire and South Carolina, obviously Nevada with its caucus is in between. That's a long political life. And we see that quite often political lives end very quickly in campaigns. But also, I think the electability argument, while it's one of the better ones that Haley can make, it's not just the issue that people believe that Donald Trump can be or can beat Joe Biden, because anybody can beat Joe Biden, Republicans think. They've been told electability counts before. They were told John McCain's the only one who can beat Barack Obama. He didn't. Then they were told 4 years later, Mitt Romney's the only one who can beat Barack Obama, and he didn't. So they don't buy the electability argument. Anyways, it's why Nikki Haley is talking about emergencies and chaos and what ifs.
And Doug, as you well know, those who are most likely to show up in the largest numbers are base Republican voters, and base Republican voters this day and era are Trump voters.
No question about it. And I think that's where South Carolina becomes really interesting. I think most people concede that
Donald Trump's going to win that. The Haley campaign isn't necessarily conceding that. But what that margin is, it looks to be larger than it was in New Hampshire and certainly Iowa, or close to Iowa. And this is her home state, a state that she was governor of, elected statewide. That becomes very difficult to make the political case, much less the mathematical case, for staying in the race.
And Caitlin, on Super Tuesday, that's 36% of allocated delegates. That's a big, big map. And I've covered a few of these campaigns. If you're not already advertising in those states, if you're not already putting a marker in those states while you're trying to compete in South Carolina, it's going to be too late. And things will slip through your fingers.
Exactly. And the idea that, there's a short amount of time after South Carolina to the Super Tuesday states. So she's focusing the next several weeks on South Carolina, campaigning very heavily there. Quick turnaround to Super Tuesday. She argues that she has the money to stay in it. But I think, Trump's hold on the state parties and the way the campaign has been able to organize the parties in such a way that benefits him in the delegate count. That's apparent in Nevada especially. That is a big story of this election. And the way that he's able to get all of these delegates, the way that he's organized these state parties.
Doug, pick up on that, because I think this is an underappreciated part of the reality of this Republican nomination battle, such as it is. In 2016, the RNC and state parties were not Trump-aligned. They are, if not decisively, certainly more visibly aligned than they were then.
No question about it. And we saw the RNC almost go all in for Trump, which would have turned the RNC as an organization into an anti-Haley mechanism, which the RNC has very strict rules about objectivity and neutrality as opposed to the senatorial and congressional committees. But I think for Haley here, the question is about math in two ways. One, can she get the delegates she needs? Obviously not. But can she continue to accrue delegates so that if we get to that break glass scenario, if Donald Trump is convicted, for instance, if there's a health issue, she can legitimately say, I'm the one with the most delegates. I outlasted everybody else. I should be the nominee moving forward.
Question for you both, and picking up on what you just said, Doug. Money, math, but also is there a way of saying, hey, Trump, I'm going to stay in to show you that I have this constituency in the suburbs, in the exurbs, among women that you will need. And you better think about me when you're making that running mate choice.
That's a big part of subliminally what she's saying. Her challenge with that is Team Trump wants nothing to do with her. And internally, they're not just knifing her so that we can all see it. They're knifing her with Donald so that when he makes that decision, it most likely would not be her.
Caitlin,
and you hear that from his supporters as well. There is a real divide, and he has cast her as the kind of establishment, elite, donor-based globalist class, and that has seeped through in conversations that I've had with voters, not just those supporting him, but Republican voters at large. But her case is, to your point, have the money. I'm the last person standing, the last woman standing, and she's starting to increase those attacks against Trump. We'll see if that makes any difference.
And choosing Haley would be a completely rational political decision, so we should assume that Donald Trump probably goes elsewhere.
And who else would President Trump have sent to the UN as the United States ambassador but a globalist? Let's be honest. Caitlin, Huey Burns, and Doug Heye, thank you so very much. We are awaiting rulings in multiple cases involving former President Trump, civil and criminal. Where the Republican frontrunner's legal troubles stand, you're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The judge in former President Trump's civil fraud case said he would try to issue a ruling by today. New York Attorney General Letitia James is asking for a $370 million fine and a lifetime ban on the Trump Organization working in the state's real estate industry. Former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree joins us now. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not going to get through all of the former president's various pending legal matters in 5 minutes, but we're going to make our best effort. Tom, it's so great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's put a full screen up on the screen for our viewers to see Trump's legal troubles as they currently are known. 4 criminal, 2 civil. All right? We have upcoming rulings. Control room, go to that next graphic. In Trump cases. That is the New York civil fraud trial and presidential immunity. And, Tom, you also know next week the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on the 14th Amendment and whether the former president's name should be stricken from primary or general election ballots. All right, that's a little bit of an intro. What would you like to jump into first? What do you think is the most interesting or possibly poses the greatest jeopardy to the former president?
Well, there's certainly no shortage of options here.
None,
Major, as
none.
you and then the control room ably portrayed, the president faces legal challenges on multiple fronts. Some are civil threats, some are political threats. On the civil side, I think the biggest challenge he faces right now is this imminent decision in New York in the civil fraud trial. I have no doubt that that trial judge, who has already made his views of former President Trump's business practices known, is going to drop the hammer on the former president. I think he's going to impose a very substantial monetary sanction. I think there's a very good chance that he places severe restrictions on the former president and maybe his family members' ability to do business in the state of New York. So I think that's the most immediate threat he faces on the civil front, but there's no shortage of threats on other fronts as well.
And Tom, as you know, that's one that aggravates him to the core, the former president. He has raged about this case even more than the E. Jean Carroll case, just recently decidedly against the former president.
It really does. And certainly we got a taste of that during the trial itself, when he would attend the trial and he would make statements and he would irritate the judge and he would attack the judge. So this really cuts at the core of how he has presented himself historically as a businessman, of one of great success, of great wealth, because so much of what the attorney general is arguing here is that he's inflated his assets, he's inflated his wealth. He may not be as rich as he really claims. And as we've seen, that really does strike at his core.
Let's talk about the 14th Amendment case and this absolute immunity, because they fall clearly within your bailiwick of legal expertise. The president is arguing that he should enjoy, and every president should enjoy, absolute immunity from prosecution in perpetuity. Is there any constitutional foundation for that argument?
Not for the extent of immunity that he's demanding. There certainly is a constitutional basis for a more limited scope of immunity. We've seen that with regard to other presidents. President Nixon, President Clinton had issues with immunity, but there's no constitutional basis.
In the scope of the office and official duties, there is some protection.
That's right, and also in civil cases. This, of course,
can't be harassed by that while in office.
Exactly, that you can defer those types of things because judges are cognizant of the burdens that it places on a sitting president to defend himself and while in office. However, there is not a constitutional precedent for the sweeping scope of immunity that former President Trump is demanding, namely immunity from criminal prosecution for pretty much anything he did when he was in office. I don't think he's going to win on this argument.
What about the 14th Amendment? The Supreme Court wants to take this case on. There'll be oral arguments. There have been lots of briefs filed. Where do you think that case lands, and what do you think the Supreme Court is most likely to do? Dodge it or get directly involved?
I think the Supreme Court will get directly involved. I think they will decide this. I don't think they have any choice, frankly. And as far as which way...
Because they need to send a clear signal to all the other states.
They do. You can't have a situation, as we do now, where you have different states, different courts taking different approaches, some disqualifying him under one standard, some saying disqualification doesn't apply. This is why we have the Supreme Court, to resolve these types of conflicts and confusion in the lower courts. As far as what I think they're going to decide, my strong hunch is that they are going to reverse the Colorado Supreme Court's decision disqualifying Trump. I think they're going to say that this just isn't how the amendment works. This is not the way that you would disqualify someone from the ballot, so they will allow him to remain on the ballot.
Do you think in that decision the court will render any opinion on whether the president is or isn't an insurrectionist?
My guess is they will not render an opinion on that one. Look, I can promise you that there's not a single justice on that court who wants to get involved in this case. This is kind of the hot potato of all cases. I think the court realizes it pays a slight institutional price anytime it dives into the political waters. They were not looking to take this case. As I said, I don't think they had a choice, but I don't think they're going to want to get within 1,000 feet of the question whether former President Trump is an insurrectionist.
I bet you're right about that. Tom
We'll
Dupree,
see.
Thank you so very much. That does it for today. We'll be back with another excellent edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS.